AI,
Right.
right. It's not just some futuristic fantasy anymore. It's here, and it's kind of calling the shots in some pretty important areas already.
Oh, absolutely. Things like, getting a loan, landing a job, even national security decisions. AI is already a player.
Exactly. And with the election coming up, well, figuring out how to regulate this tech, it's a huge deal, especially because, Harris and Trump, they've got like completely different ideas about how to handle it.
Totally different approaches. Yeah. And that's what makes this recent article by Jimmy Bearden so relevant. It's called AI Regulation in the 2024 U.S. Presidential Election, Harris versus Trump. And it really lays out the battle lines in this whole AI debate.
Okay, so first up, tell us how Bearden kind of sets the stage. Like, how far apart are these two on AI?
Well, he starts by highlighting just how different their philosophies are.
Yeah.
Harris seems to be sticking with the Biden administration stance, which is basically, more government oversight. They're really emphasizing AI safety, tackling algorithmic bias, making sure AI is used responsibly, that sort of thing.
So, like, checks and balances for AI.
Exactly. They see a really strong role for the government in steering this technology.
And then on the other side of the ring, we've got Trump, and he's all about, what, hitting the gas on AI development.
Full speed ahead. Deregulation is the name of the game for him. In fact, one of the things Bearden points out is that Trump's actually planning to overturn Biden's executive order on AI safety testing.
Whoa, hold on. That executive order, the one that says companies have to share their AI safety test results.
That's the one. It also sets standards for security, privacy, all sorts of things. A Trump administration might not prioritize those quite as much.
So it's like cast low and steady versus pedal to the metal when it comes to AI.
You got it. And this difference in philosophy, it really becomes even more obvious when you look at the issue of what Bearden calls algorithmic harm.
Okay, so break that down for me. What's algorithmic harm in plain English?
Sure. So basically, it's the risk that AI algorithms, those sets of rules that AI uses to make decisions, could actually end up making existing biases in our society even worse.
Oh, I see what you mean. So like an AI that's deciding who gets a loan, right? But it's using data that's already biased against certain groups of people.
Exactly. Or imagine applying for a job, and some algorithm tosses your resume in the trash just because of, your zip code or something crazy like that. That's the kind of unintended but really damaging consequence we're talking about.
Yeah, no kidding. That's a huge EE problem. So where do Harris and Trump stand on this whole algorithmic harm thing?
Well, Bearden says that Harris is really focused on tackling it head on. She's all about ethical and fair AI implementation.
So she wants to make sure AI doesn't make inequality even worse based on...
Exactly. Trump, on the other hand, well, he talks a lot about free speech and human flourishing in the context of AI. But when it comes to concrete plans to minimize algorithmic harm, Bearden doesn't really lay out anything specific.
Interesting. So this is kind of like he's saying, let AI develop without too many rules, even if there might be some negative side effects.
That seems to be the general idea, at least from what I'm getting from Bearden's analysis. And that kind of leads us to another big point of disagreement between the two. Setting standards for AI.
Standards. You mean like rules that tech companies have to follow when they're developing AI?
Exactly. The Biden-Harris approach is all about setting those standards. Encouraging those voluntary commitments from tech companies to protect individual rights and being really proactive about finding vulnerabilities in those big, powerful AI models.
So it's like innovation is great, but let's make sure it's happening responsibly.
Exactly. But Trump's approach, he's advocating for a free market approach. Let AI development just happen with minimal government interference.
Which, okay, yeah, that sounds great for encouraging innovation. But like Bearden was saying earlier, there might be a trade-off there. We might end up sacrificing safety and accountability just to speed things up.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is it worth rushing ahead with AI development? If it means we might end up with some seriously bad unintended consequences down the road.
Man, that's a tough one. And it's something that Bearden really makes you think about. And you know what else is crazy? This whole AI regulation thing, it's not just an American issue.
Oh, absolutely not.
It's global, right?
Totally. It's playing out on a global stage. And the U.S. stance on this, it's going to have ripple effects everywhere.
Like setting a precedent. If America goes one way, other countries might follow.
Exactly. And, Bearden actually highlights Harris has been really actively involved in those international discussions on AI safety, especially at that big global summit back in 23.
Right.
Which suggests that she's really committed to shaping those global standards for responsible AI development.
Which, again, very different from Trump's approach, which, like you were saying, could have those ripple effects.
Yeah, it's like we're not just deciding the future of AI in the U.S., we're potentially shaping how the rest of the world deals with it, too.
That is wild. Okay, so we've talked about these two very different visions for AI's future, but what does this actually mean for, the average person? That's what I really want to dig into next.
Let's do it.
I mean, seriously, it's not like we're just deciding what takeout to order here. We're talking about shaping the future of AI, potentially for the entire planet.
It really is a huge responsibility. And it shows just how interconnected everything is these days,
Like what happens in one country with AI, it doesn't just stay within their borders anymore.
Exactly. Think about how the U.S. handles data privacy. Other countries often end up following our lead.
So, like, the decisions made in the next few weeks, they could have ripple effects for years, maybe even decades to come.
Absolutely. It makes you realize this election, it's not just about picking a president. It's about choosing a direction for technology, for our entire society.
That's such a good point. It's bigger than just red versus blue, isn't it?
It really is. This whole AI thing, it forces us to look beyond those traditional political labels.
Totally. It's not about being pro-technology or anti-technology. It's about figuring out, okay, how do we actually want this technology to shape our world? And what are we not willing to compromise on?
Exactly. And one thing I really appreciate about Bearden's article is he lays out these different viewpoints, but he doesn't tell you what to think.
Yeah, he just gives you the information.
Yeah.
And lets you draw your own conclusions.
Exactly. It's up to us as citizens to decide what we believe in and what kind of future we want.
Okay, so big picture stuff aside, let's get down to brass tacks. Bearden talks about these different approaches to AI regulation, but I'm curious about the practical side of things. Like, let's say one of these visions wins out. What does that actually look like in the real world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
For real. Like, are we going to see self-driving cars banned?
Yeah.
Or, like, facial recognition software everywhere?
Well, it's tough to say for sure, but we can look at some specific examples and try to imagine how these different approaches might play out.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
So let's take self-driving cars, right?
Prime example. Everybody's talking about them.
Exactly. Now, a more hands-on approach, like the one Harris seems to be leaning toward, that could mean we see stricter safety regulations for those vehicles.
Which, okay, that makes sense. But wouldn't that slow things down?
It could, yeah. Some people argue that too much regulation stifles innovation.
Right.
But on the flip side, that extra time, those stricter regulations, they could also help build public trust.
Oh, interesting. So it's like if people know that self-driving cars have to meet these really high standards, they might be more willing to actually, like, get in one.
Exactly. It's a trade-off.
Slower development? Maybe. But potentially higher levels of safety and public acceptance.
Precisely.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about with a more hands-off approach, like the one Trump seems to be advocating for?
Well, in that scenario, we could see self-driving cars hitting the roads a lot faster. Fewer regulations often mean a quicker path to market.
Right.
But it also means we're putting a lot of faith in those companies, trusting them to prioritize safety, even without the government breathing down their necks.
Which, let's be real, sometimes works out. And sometimes not so much.
Exactly.
And it's not just self-driving cars either, right? I mean, this whole conversation.
Yeah.
It applies to facial recognition, to algorithms used by police departments, even AI being used in healthcare decisions.
Oh, absolutely. And those are just the ones we can think of right now.
Oh my gosh, you're right. What about the AI stuff that's coming down the pipeline that we don't even know about yet?
Right. It's like trying to write the rules for a game that hasn't even been invented yet.
That's got to be a nightmare for lawmakers.
It's a huge challenge for sure. There's no easy answer. It's this constant balancing act, trying to encourage innovation, but also putting safeguards in place to prevent harm.
So we need to find that sweet spot, that middle ground between, like, full steam ahead and slamming on the brakes.
I think you're right. It's not about picking one side or the other. It's about having a more nuanced conversation, recognizing that the right answer, it might depend on the specific technology, the potential risks, and what we as a society decide we value most.
It's like we need a custom-fit solution for every new AI development, because they all come with their own baggage.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so challenging, but also so fascinating. It's not a static issue with a clear-cut answer, It's constantly evolving, which means our thinking about it has to evolve too.
Man, it's a lot to process.
Yeah.
But I have to say, this conversation, it's really helped me understand what's at stake here.
Me too, definitely.
And I hope it's doing the same for our listeners.
I hope so too, because at the end of the day, knowledge is power.
Right on.
The more we understand about AI, the good and the bad, the better equipped we'll be to advocate for the future we want.
100%. So to everyone listening, stay curious, stay engaged,
Yeah.
and never stop asking those tough questions.
Yes. Because the future of AI, it's not set in stone. We all have a role to play in shaping it.
Okay, but hold on a sec. We've been talking a lot about the future.
Yeah.
But AI is already here, right? It's already impacting our lives.
That's true. It's easy to get caught up in the what ifs. But the reality is, AI is already making decisions that affect us every single day.
Exactly. And the choices we're making right now, they're going to determine what that impact looks like.
Couldn't agree more.
It's a lot of responsibility, but it's also incredibly exciting. At least that's how I see it.
Me too.
It's like we're not just along for the ride anymore. We're actually in the driver's seat. At least we have the potential to be.
We do. We really do. And it's on us to make sure we're paying attention, right?
Aye.
Asking the right questions.
Absolutely.
It's easy to get swept up in those day-to-day headlines about AI, this new development, that new breakthrough.
Totally.
But we can't lose sight of the bigger picture.
So true.
We have to constantly be asking ourselves, okay, what kind of world are we creating with this technology? What are we willing to risk? And what are those non-negotiables?
Man, you're really making me think. And honestly, that's what I love about these deep dives. They always leave me with more questions than answers, but in a good way.
I'm with you there.
Jimmy Bearden's article, it really got me fired up about this whole AI thing.
He's a great writer, really knows how to get to the heart of the matter.
He does. And, I have a feeling our listeners are going to be feeling the same way. This is one of those topics that just grabs you.
Oh, totally. It's like AI is no longer some abstract concept. It's right here, right now.
In our pockets, on our wrists.
Exactly. And it's only going to become more integrated into our lives.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Just this. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. The future of AI, it's not some predetermined thing. It's something we're all creating together, whether we realize it or not.
I love that. We're not just passive bystanders.
Exactly. So let's make sure the future of AI is one we're all proud to be a part of.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But seriously, keep that conversation going. Talk to your friends, your family. Share this episode with anyone who'll listen.
Spread the word.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those tough questions. See ya.